This is under 2 years and back.
Yeah.
I belonged on this and looked there. My
How are you?
they keep talking.
Yeah, I remember. Thanks for coming.
And it's so irritating. Wandering around with the dog.
Well, sometimes people are late arrivals.
Yeah, and then I'm walking around with his ears, which looks like they're lanterns.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you knew that was going to happen.
Okay, what size do you guys like? Large? Let me show you that large.
So I want to thank the people who made it possible for us to put this on today. So I'd like to thank the Fire Safety Council of San Luis Obispo and Supervisor Bruce Gibson. They both provided money to help put this on because we're a nonprofit. We don't make any money, so we appreciate that. Also, the Cambria Community Services District donated the facility and their services to use it. We appreciate that. And then all of our vendors here today. We have the Fire Safety Council of San Luis Obispo. We have CAL FIRE, Cambria Fire. We have the Horse Emergency Evacuation Team from North County. We have Cambria CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. We have Slow Animal Services. The Sheriff's Department is here for E911 and Reverse 911 if you want information on that. And then also we have Fire Safety Council outside, and the Cambria Community Healthcare District also is gracefully here today as well, and we'll be handing some things out. So without ado, I will get started. I'm happy to introduce a good friend of mine that I met a long time ago. When I used to be fire chief here, I reached out to him for some technical information. And I introduce to you Christopher Dicus. Dr. Christopher Dicus is a professor and coordinator of the Wildland Fire and Fuels Management Program at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. Dr. Dicus is the past president of the Association for Fire Ecology, which is an international scientific society. He's the coordinator of the Wildland Urban Interface Module of the California Fire Science Consortium. He sits on the board of directors of the San Luis Obispo County Fire Safe Council, and he was previously the president of that organization. And he's a principal investigator in the Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute at Cal Poly. Dr. Dicus' expertise lies in how various fuel treatments impact wildland fuel fire behavior and reducing the loss and risk of structural and wildland urban interface fires. Dr. Dicus is a certified senior fire ecologist and a
good thing, bad thing, in that I've been at the worst fire disasters, like at Ground Zero in Australia. I've been dealing with fire in Southeast Asia, Europe, both Canada, just different places around. And it's fascinating to me that there are a tremendous amount of sort of overlap of each of these different areas. And before the plague hit, I had the pleasure of being at a group of scientists and managers in Marseille, France. And we had people from South Africa, from South America, Australia, Europe, all these places. And we started talking about, what is the issue that we're at? And I found it was fascinating to me. It's like it didn't matter what the ecosystem was. It didn't matter what the culture was. It's like there was this tremendous amount of overlap that is happening across the world. So like you see the photo behind me, this is the Tubbs Fire up in Santa Rosa, which just kind of struck me. This is Coffee Park, and it was interesting. This is actually not a setup shot. A colleague of mine was looking at me being pensive and contemplative, because it's something that honestly, when you're around this sort of thing, it's you get a little trauma, if you want to be real honest. And so hopefully being able to share some of the experiences and some of my thoughts, if I was able to run the zoo, give you some things to consider, to be able to make yourself and your homes perhaps a little bit safer. So what my plan is here is to try to give sort of a 40,000 foot overview, just some things, and then provide you with perhaps some very specific take-home things that's like, okay, I don't need to bulldoze my house and start over completely, and I recognize that a lot of these mitigations at your house, it can be a little bit overwhelming just to get started. So what are some of those things that's like you really need to consider through there? And then at the end, I'll leave you with, I'm obviously not going to be of Cambria, right? That's bad because it's going to impact the things that we love. And so it's kind of this message that as I head up the WUI side of California's Fire Science Consortium, is that, fire bad, and you're trying to like prevent things, for fire from happening. So it is a little bit difficult, and on a management basis for some of your local leaders, it's not an easy thing to come through because fire has its place. It's critical, and we live in nature, but we have to understand that nature is going to come up and it's going to do nasty things at sometimes. So one of the things that we do with like my classes and whatnot is being able to get out on prescribed burns and trying to allow students to actually see fire. So this is just another day in the lab, and President Armstrong at Cal Poly, I've suggested multiple times, just lose that whole learn by doing. We want to be burned by doing, and it hasn't caught on yet. I don't know, so. Well, I want to tell you some more things that we got some really pertinent things that's kind of exciting. That's literally one of the only places in the world that's happening, if you can advance, is that just within the last year, we have started up a new Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute. And this was kind of spearheaded by myself and Dan Turner, who is the executive director of our county fire safe council. And Dan was the previous unit chief for CAL FIRE in this county, a really forward-thinking person, and he works very hard upon your behalf to get you money to do some of the very things that we're trying to kind of fix in Cambria and throughout the county. And we went up. What we saw is that no matter what silo that you were in, so like if you were a firefighter, you kind of took everything from the lens as like, oh, we have to put this out, sort of like a fire bad, and it's all about more engines, more people with heavy machinery. And it's like, well, what do I do? How do I get this? How do I get training? What sorts of certificates do we need? And these are things that we're starting to work into. So go ahead and advance it. So just to kind of give you an idea that, just let you know, in this county, we've got a pretty special place where literally this is nowhere else in the country do you see sort of these disciplines, very disparate, different types of disciplines that are working together. So I kind of work with sort of the fire ecology, management, fire behavior, these sorts of things. But we also have programs like fire protection engineering. Now, this will blow your mind. So there are only 3 fire protection engineering programs in the entire country, and we are the only one that is west of the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah, it's crazy. So I work a lot with those folks from an engineering standpoint. We actually came up to Cambria once. We had some experiments because you got this amazing compressed air foam system in your engines, and we were testing that. And working with those guys, actually got to go to the East Coast, and in the name of science, we burned down buildings just to see what would happen. It's a great job. But we got these other things, like we know like city and regional planning is incredibly important. Where do we put these things? Do we really want to have like an elementary school up a one-way, just a dead-end road up a canyon, a box canyon? Maybe not, and so looking at that. We work with architects, construction engineers, landscape architects, and we're working together in this interdisciplinary space to try to solve this problem. And just to let you know that each of these disciplines, we've got our own sort of worldview, but it's been really neat to come through and work with these people from different disciplines to do different things, whether it's the utilities or buildings or smoke impacts on public health, these things. These are sorts of the projects that we're working on. Bad day in August. So what happens under, like if I was to change the conditions for the conditions you might expect during this sort of an offshore wind event. So this is 5 hours under normal conditions. No worries, we can take care of this, right? Well, let's go ahead and let's see what happens when I put in the extreme weather. And so in 5 hours, there is the potential with a strong wind, to be able to go from over by the cemetery, to the ocean. And again, this is not meant to scare you. It's just meant to show you that there is potential. And it's like, well, that's just sort of a computer model. Computer can tell you anything. Well, from other experience in the local area just down the street, you go ahead and click the next one here. This is an example of fire burning. Now, this is not Monterey pine, but this is Bishop pine, which is fairly similar, burning over like in the Coon Creek drainage over Montana de Oro, right at the basis there. So this stuff will take off, under the right conditions. It will certainly get your attention. And when this fire took off and burned off just a tremendous amount of energy that was being released, a tremendous amount of smoke that's going on, this honestly, it's similar to the conditions that we see in a lot of places of Cambria, where again, a different species, but it was sort of at the end of its life cycle. It was something that it's old, it's sick, it's got insects, it's disease, and then you've got shrubs that are coming up underneath it, taken care of, and a lot of ways, it can take off. And so, again, not trying to scare you, just make you aware that there is potential that if a fire took off under the right conditions, you could have extreme fire behavior. But you don't need to have extreme fire behavior to kind of have a bad day, to be a fire engine in every driveway. It's just not going to happen. And I'm also happy to see that the fire service is starting to recognize that, as a former firefighter, was like, we can take care of this. And it's like, the problem is so overwhelming right now under the right conditions that the firefighters are going to do everything they can. They put themselves in just really scary, scary conditions on your behalf, but they can't be everywhere, all places at the same time. And so you see, like this photo, this is a photo that was taken during the 2007 fire siege in Southern California. And as a former firefighter, I will say I would contend, I don't think that this is, frankly, a really good idea, because these guys in the back just know that it is not in their job description to die, all right? So protect a house, protect bushes, it's not thing. Working incredibly hard on your behalf, but it's not in their job description to get killed. And so, be grateful for these men and women that are out there, but they can't be all things to all people. So, I'll give you a couple examples of what's happening. Go ahead and turn it. So, earlier in my career when I first got here, I noticed there was interesting two different sort of scenarios showing that firefighters can't be everywhere. So there was a fire up in Atascadero. It was like 0.2 of an acre, tiny little property, and literally if you stepped out on the road, you could look down the street and you could see the fire station. Tiny fire, but because of the fuels leading up to fire-prone houses, you had two houses ignite before the fire engines showed up. And these fire engines were just down the street. So things can happen very, very rapidly. And because this thing absolutely just blew up. And this was not during windy conditions. This was burning in healthy, disease-ridden trees with very little wind. And as I was coming down the mountain, I'm coming on, this doesn't look good. And I could not believe how fast that thing was blowing up. And as I was coming down the mountain, I'm thinking, am I going to be able to make it off? Because there's one way off the mountain, which is down on the other side of that lake is coming through. So I'm like, oh my gosh. I want to try to get us off the mountain, but trying to have multiple backup plans in case that was precluded through. And there was such chaos coming through. I was kind of like that pedantic jackwagon academic that I'm pulling over, and I'm trying to get information. Where is the fire? What's happening? And I'm watching them still allow, like law enforcement, allow cars to go up the mountain. I'm like, this is not a good idea. They need to turn back, and we need to figure out how to protect these people and not keep putting them in harm's way. And I was talking to a lot of the young firefighters that are on staff, and you know, they were new. Again, incredibly hardworking, went through a lot of the training, but with my experience, I'm watching this thing blow up and saying, look, man, this plume is going up and it's going to eventually collapse, and when it collapses, it's just going to blow out in all directions. And we're like, oh, that's nice, you know, that's great. When that's exactly what happened. But the point is like, there was mass chaos. People didn't know where the fire was at. You know, people still trying to get their handle on it, where this mass pandemonium that's going on outside. So, with that, I will say, and you guys in the back don't get too upset, is that, go ahead and change it. We're never, ever, never, ever, never, ever going to solve our problems with just more bear down. They would doze it over, this fire breaks through. Over here on the side where the forest was, the eucalyptus forest was, they would every single year on this small island do a prescribed burn there to try to keep down the risk to the town of Coles Bay. But look what the community, Coles Bay, did. All it would take is a single ember to kind of get into the landscaping, into the houses, and that whole town was toast. So did these things help? Absolutely. They help. If they had more fire staff on the side, would it help? Absolutely. It would help. We want more people. We want more things done. But that's not the end all to end all when it comes to this. So it takes sort of this partnership between the public agencies and with you as individual residents in here to try to make this community safer, make it easier for the firefighters to do their job, make it safer for you when it's time to eventually to get out. And I mentioned that I've seen similar things all around the world, and it's kind of become frustrating to me a little bit that we keep doing the same mistakes over and over and over. Nothing malicious. It's just like, oh, well, I never thought that would have happened. So go ahead, the next one. This kind of brings it out. This is a photo. This is one of these photos. It's like, oh, this is kind of neat. This was on another part of the fire complex up near Santa Rosa, up in Sonoma County in 2017. And this was the fire chief of one of the local fire departments that was there. And he was a little shell-shocked. He had his house burned down during this. And, you know, everyone was screaming, it's like, how could this ever happen? How is this possible? This is not a fireplace, right? Well, then, you know, in his shell-shocked state, where all he owned was in the back of this truck, he pulls out this magazine. It's like, come here, I want to show you something. And so he pulls that in. I was so excited at first. It's like, yes, these people are getting their lives back. They're rebuilding. This is wonderful. And, oh, no. Because they're doing the exact same things. And so you can see right here, this is a burnt out snag that was there. They rebuilt the house, but notice you've got like wood mulch that led directly to the wood fence, that led directly to the wood house. The underneath the deck that was there, which was also combustible wood, they had it wide open so anything, you know, embers could get in there. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It's like, did you guys not have to build back to the new fire standards? And the local politicians in the city of Santa Rosa trying to do the best that they could, you know, trying to get the victims back on their feet, they allowed them to rebuild back to the old standards. And it's like, oh, this has never happened. This is a one-off. And it's like, it did happen before, the exact same fire footprint. And it's like, well, yeah, well, that was really extreme circumstances. We're really not worried about it. Fast forward, the very next year, the Kincaid fire rolled down there and about took out the same neighborhood. There was a lot of scaredness going on. So again, not trying to scare you, but it's like, let's do better, because we know that there are better ways to do things. All right, so go ahead and switch it. Kind of mentioned with this WUI Institute, we're about trying to find holistic solutions, things that we can do before, during, and after the fire to make it so that we can survive. We can make it easier for the firefighters out there to protect us. And even if they don't show up, we have a better chance of ourselves surviving as well as the things that we hold near and dear. So my own students say that I show a lot of pictures myself, but here's another pensive thing. This is me at the Black Saturday fire through this. And it's not only just the things that we have to do, like biophysical things, and we're going to talk about some specific biophysical things that we can do to our house, but social science, it's commonly lacking. There are good things, that information is out there. How do we incentivize people to do good things? You know, what are the different carrots or sticks that we can utilize, you know, to be able to do good things, so we're not having, you know, PTSD, you know, for not only the folks that are not having this level of mass sort of destruction and death all around it. And so sort of the analogy, I don't know, there was a romantic comedy that came out in like the mid-2000s. You might be familiar with it. It's a really sweet show. Go ahead and hit it, Bob. It was a movie called 300. Are you familiar with this? I don't know. So if you're familiar with the movie 300, which it's not something I would particularly share in Sunday school or something, but it's a movie in which you had this millions of Persians come across and are attacking the Sparta, and there was only 300 of these. So let's use the analogy that the Persians, the millions and millions of Persians are coming up, are like this large fire that's coming through, this destructive force. And let's look at the firefighters as being this 300. So if you watch the movie, the spoiler alert, all the Spartans die. All right, but they are able to beat off the Persians for a very long, extended time, trying to protect the things that they love. And the very, very well-trained, well-equipped, they had the best swords or spears or whatever, you know, they're trained from the moment they were born. But that movie could have been 300, could have been. You can stop that very first spark from ever happening, and that's not with any other sort of natural disaster. And 90% of the wildfires in California are started by people some way. There's a couple of overriding things that we'll kind of talk about here in just a little bit. You know, every now and then, you know, we do have lightning busts. We had lightning ignitions here in this county. We had one just south of us over off of Old Creek Road a couple years ago that kind of got some people's attention. But about every 10 years or so in this part of the world, up and down California, we have these lightning busts. Okay, not a lot we can do about that. But what can we do to kind of prevent that fire from happening in the first place? Well, one of the major sort of ignition sources, unfortunately for the large destructive wildfires we've seen, have been at utility lines. You get winds blowing, hot, windy day, and starts blowing debris up into the power lines, or there's some sort of short that starts sending lines that are out. Well, what can we do about that? Well, you know, one of the things is to try to clear out the vegetation around your lines. And so I'm not advocating that you go out there and do that, but if you've got, you know, power lines running through, you know, your property where you're living at, you know, you can call PG&E and say, hey, look, there's a real issue and they need to take care of it. And I can tell you right now, that is now a known sort of liability, and I've been doing a lot in the court systems, and so if you tell them and it's documented and something bad happens, they're on the hook for a lot of things. And so getting them out there and saying, hey, here's an issue we need to deal with, you know, they're fairly responsive has been my experience to get out there and to deal with this. And one of the things that why we do this, why do we try to work with power lines? Well, it stops the ignition, but these things also burn down. Fix the problem. I mean, I'm happy to see that we fixed the problem now at that pole. We still have our other issues. You know, we've had, I think in about a 10-year period, we had 6 wildfires run across campus. One, they know that the people who started one of those fires were the people installing the sprinkler system, the fire sprinklers in the new dorms. They got off work and started drinking and throwing, firecrackers around, and whoops, sorry to see that. We've had students start fires, these sorts of things that can be sort of a problem. So we've had our own sorts of issues. Now, other things that we've got here, other sorts of prevention things, is that, road signs. That's a huge sort of issue for fire ignitions, where if you don't have power lines, we've had major fires start via people, less so here, but like, maybe have a trailer with chains kind of coming off, and dragging behind. You might have like really hot overheated catalytic converters, just one little thing, and kind of gets off into the grass or something that was there. Here's a fun fact. Everyone knows Cuesta Grade. Everyone loves driving that little thing. In a 10-year period, they've had over 200 ignitions on that road. Isn't that nuts? And yet, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but there's an agency that controls that is like, look, we got ways. Let's work on this. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll see. So we're still working on that issue. So we need to try to protect the things that we've got along roadside for not only like the car ignitions, but also for helping out with evacuation. Whoops, go back just a little bit there, and show you so some of the things that you see in town here. We've got sort of these piles that folks are like, what are you doing? You're cutting the vegetation. Well, there's a really strong reason for that. It's trying to keep ignitions, but here is it's a sneaky little bugger. It will come at you at multiple different fronts. So a lot of times we have this idea that during wildfire it's just like this giant tsunami wave of flame that's coming across the landscape. And that's not particularly the normal way that happens. Instead, we see things like embers, and it's like this fire is hopscotching across the landscape. And so it's throwing out new fires ahead of it, and then the main fire is like, oh, well, I'm about to burn out, and sort of they kind of draw in. And so as fire moves across the landscape, you've got embers, and we're talking about millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of these embers. And it's not like a campfire where you kind of come by and kick it. It's like, oh, isn't that pretty, sort of thing. These are millions of these things that are coming up, and depending upon the wind size and the vegetation that that are coming through at whatever wind speed is coming through. So you've got potential 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. Probably not going to happen here in Cambria, but these things are traveling sideways, and wherever they can get into the house, that is going to have a potential to ignite the home. So the embers are landing up against the home, and fun fact, a lot of homes during a wildfire actually ignite and burn from the inside out. It's like, how does that happen? It's like these embers are they're sneaky little buggers. They're trying to get in anywhere they possibly can. So I mentioned Dan Turner. He has this great sort of mitigation that comes up that a test. It's like if you take a garden hose and you sort of spray it up against the house, wherever water is going to get in, embers are going to get in. And so that's sort of a kind of an interesting test that we have. Now, another big concern, and I'm seeing this more and more, and this has potential to be a problem here in Cambria, frankly, is because the lot sizes are really, really small. Like where I live in Los Osos, name of what we refer to as a shaded fuel break. Now, these things you see here, they're not meant to stop a wildfire, right? So that's not the intention. Even though that this is significantly different and it's not going to have that intense fire spread, it'll still burn through that. But it provides means for which the firefighters can get in there, and it also provides you a safer way to get out because you don't have bazillion-foot flames that are ready to burn your face off. It makes it a little bit easier here. So it's interesting in this community as I know that for me, from my perspective, and background, I came through and it's like, wow, this is really, really awesome. This is great. But I know it took a heck of a lot of work to get this done because people are fighting, and I think I read something in the paper where it's like the masticators are going to vaporize the deer and stuff, and it's crazy. Deer actually, they have this amazing thing. They actually will run away. It's kind of cool. Sort of thing. These things can be kind of loud. So I don't know. I think that this is a good thing. From an ecology side, though, it's kind of like, I'm watching these trees. They're now a little bit happier because they're not competing for water and light and these other things, but they're getting really old. And so I get worried about Cambria pines by the sea. It's like, whoops, is this going to turn into Cambria oaks by the sea? Because, the trees, especially as you get to the west of, to the east of Highway 1, it starts to dry out. You don't have that sort of fog drip that's going on. All right. So again, this is sort of things we can do at a landscape sort of level, but perhaps more important in terms of mitigating the potential for risk of your homes burning down is like, do the landscape level treatments work? Absolutely. We want more of this. But perhaps the more important thing we need to consider is the landscaping scale, the things around our individual house. So let's go ahead and look at this. And there's these different zones by which we get rid of not only the vegetation, especially in this zone 0, the first 5 feet away from the house. And it doesn't have to look like a complete moonscape. I mean, there are ways that you can do this, can be really, really attractive and actually accent your house where it's not a moonscape. But other things we got to look out for, because again, these embers, these millions and millions of embers, where are they landing? The pine trees and the oaks we got, they put stuff on the ground. You guys are constantly having to clean this up, rake stuff up, in the fall. So wherever this is going to land, the embers, like on the ground, has the potential for igniting this. And anytime you've got a flame on your house, even if it's like a half-inch flame, that's a bad, bad day, sort of thing. So look at where, like, the wind patterns are coming through. Where are this litter, this debris accumulating? Because the same place that you're finding that the litter is accumulating on the ground, this debris, that's the same place that the embers are going to be coming out to. Another thing that need to strongly consider too is just like mulch. For ground cover, my wife Melissa and I were total into like regenerative agriculture. Cover up the bare dirt. We don't like that. We need good soil. And so we've got mulch. But that mulch, again, coming right up, this is where a fire had started down. This is during the Witch Creek fire. And the fire literally was coming through, and it was about half-inch flames that it took about 4 hours to smolder. Big fire. Everyone had evacuated. Fire service wasn't around. They were chasing the main flames. And eventually, this kind of came through, and it caught this mulch because it was right next to the house, ignited the house. And if it had not been for a person, the neighbor that was walking through just checking on everything, he literally got a garden hose and sprayed it down and stopped that fire from burning down. But again, it wasn't the big, massive fuels. It's just mulch. So keep the mulch right away from your house. Australia, Santa Rosa, you can see the vegetation there. Every single home is completely burned down. The worst fire disaster in U.S. history in terms of houses lost, Paradise. You saw a lot of this. These were homes that were built back in the 50s and 60s. Sound familiar? Where you got pine trees. The pine trees didn't burn down, but the houses caught fire from the embers and then had this sort of chain reaction. And again, so it's not always the vegetation is the problem. A lot of times it's the houses. And give you an example, 5 minutes, okay. Coming up next. So this is a photo of us up on the Witch Creek fire where it's doing a flyover. And it's like, wow, you see all this destruction as the fire was moving there. And it's like, okay, I can kind of see this. The fire just completely slammed in to the houses right there on that interface thing. But then you started stepping back. It's like, holy moly, there's houses like 4 blocks away from the main fire spread that caught fire, via the embers. The embers got someplace well away from the massive flames that actually ignited the houses that are there. So the buildings are things that we can do. So go ahead and switch it. So we do have, California is still the only only state in the entire country that has a building code specifically for wild and urban interface fires. And you might have heard of Chapter 7A of the California Building Code. Well, it's got things for roofs, for doors, for decks, for eaves, all these sorts of things, but it only applies to things built after 2008. All right, you guys know about the water issue here. Has there been a house built here since 2008? Okay. I just know my poor neighbor. He sold his house in Los Osos to come up here build in Cambria, and then the water moratorium came in, and he couldn't build, and so he tried things like with gutters. This is another place where we have things accumulate. But even though this is not filling up with gutter, this was meant to keep stuff out of the gutters. It's still, up there. So you've got to take care of this material, because if it ignites on your building, again, this is a bad day. We don't want this at all. All right, so we'll move on because of time, but I'm going to leave you with some very practical places to go to in a second. Other things we mentioned, embers are trying to get in, so vents to your houses. This is another place that embers can easily get into. So putting up like an 1/8-inch mesh or smaller, you want to have airflow in and out. And it's like for this person right here, it's like, okay, they put up a screen to keep out the coons and possums of their house. It's like, well, it kept the coons and possums out. It might help a little bit with the embers, but it was still big enough that's going to be able to get in there. So you need this finer mesh material. We want the house to breathe, but we don't want it to suck in embers during a wildfire. Other things, doors. Solid core doors, they're better. Keeping flashing and other sorts of things around it to be able to keep down the potential for embers to getting in it. And I have been in it, and I saw it's like, oh, cool, they put this awesome, this vinyl sort of thing. Oops, back real quick. But it's interesting. So like the vinyl weather stripping actually melted, and I've seen that where it melted, and after that melts, then it allows embers in. Other things like decks, combustible decks. This is something I saw in Australia where it burned down, and an ember caught there. Interesting. This was an ashtray outside on this deck, and we found a whole bunch of embers that had fallen into the ashtray and went out. So maybe there's a new building construction. Build your decks out of ashtrays. All right, maybe that'll work. All right. Other things to consider: windows are crazy outside the fire inside of the house, even though it started via embers getting in because he had sprayed down his windows going on. Other places to think about: some of us have skylights. This is another place they can kind of melt. In this building over here, this is a metal building. Wow, cool. The metal building survived because metal does okay during fire, right? But everything in there, including sports cars and all sorts of equipment that they had in there is completely burnt up because the skylight melted and embers got inside and burnt that up. Other things kind of coming up, exterior walls. I replaced my siding on my house with a non-combustible hardy board, but that can get pricey for some folks. But so what can you do without kind of replacing that? Well, there's sorts of things that we can do is like make sure that all the debris is away from your exterior wall. Let's go to the next one. Other things just to kind of consider: wood fences. I have a wood fence, and it's like ugh, I don't like this because it's sort of a come through. It's just sort of a wick. Here is a thing where the wood fence caught fire, and they caught it finally like 3 hours later. It was kind of burning down. It was eventually going to burn down the house there. And my own research that I've done with a grad student during the Thomas Fire, we saw that wooden fences caused a 300% increase in the potential for ignition of a home if they had a wooden fence on their property. Go figure. All right, one other thing, property hygiene. This poor fellow's trying to spray down his house, right? Right as the fire's approaching. You don't see any issue with that, right? Do you? So he might have had everything right, but we Americans, we accumulate stuff, right? And just recognize that the stuff we accumulate, where we put it, we pump that. I will admit, because I came into my own property, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is scary. Where do I start? It can be overwhelming. Honestly, it can be overwhelming. Where do you start? Where do you get the most bang for your buck? If you do something, it's better than nothing, on your property. So whatever. Oh, you can't afford to redo your house? Cool. You can't do a new roof? Cool. We'll get someone to get out there and clean up all the debris on top of it, all the pine needles. And especially with the lot sizes we see in Cambria, because things are so small, like they are in Los Osos, like they are at Coffee Park in Santa Rosa, like it's all over in California because housing prices are nuts, is that we all have to work together. And I get kind of frustrated, like myself. My wife and I have done everything we can for fire protection because we live in an area that in Los Osos that could potentially get it, but our neighbors have done nothing. And we're so close together, I can literally reach out and probably give him a high five from my kitchen window, in his house. And so I am at high risk because of him. And so it's just not your work, but it's going to take more folks to do this. And I will say that, sometimes stuff happens, things that you really can't figure out. So in the picture right before this, just show you that okay, well, anyway, it was a photo, I don't know if you saw it, where the house burned down, the forest was burned down, but the plastic greenhouse survived. I don't know. Stuff happens. It's just kind of loopy. Now, one thing you'll see in your, a lot of times in media, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, is that we're all told, it's like, oh, this is the new normal. This is the sort of thing. It's like this fatalist attitude. And I kind of rage against that a little bit because I think that so much of our fire issues we're seeing are products of...
My house's ability to not burn down because it isn't wood.
I would say replacing a combustible fence, even if it's non-combustible. I've seen it where fences have melted, and they that's fine. It's like, well, that stinks. I got to replace my fence now that I melted, but it's not that wick, and so that certainly helps. Other things I've seen too. It's like, okay, I've got my wooden fence, and yeah, it's going to put up a lot of heat, but trying to find some sort of spacer, some sort of metal spacer between the main fence to wherever it attaches to your house, that can also be helpful. But yeah, but what do you do? I mean, you guys look out there. I mean, I recently replaced part of my fence. It's not cheap, sort of thing. Yeah. All right. But it works, and I'm hoping that if the fire does come through here, I'm hoping and hopeful that that's going to be helpful for you.
Any other questions?
So a metal spacer is like you've got the wood fence, and it's just like I've seen it sort of like where it's almost like a piece where instead of wood being attached, it's like, okay, now I've got slats made of metal, sort of coming through. So even like a metal gate sometimes, it can be helpful that way. And, it's like, all right, well, the thought is, well, maybe it takes a little bit of privacy. That's a way, and it doesn't have that aesthetic. But it's pretty small in the whole grand scheme of things, the one that I've seen. But I've seen the same thing after the Thomas fire. It's like houses burned or ignited via the wood fences, and they put it right back, sort of thing. It's like, oh. But I did see others, it's like they actually did put in, some sort of metal, just a little insert, a couple 3 feet, just to keep that from burning into your house.
So I was up in San Francisco back in 1991 on the 50th floor of one of the big buildings there.
It was all the debris is just piled up all over the place. And those things too, once they catch off, the peely bark, they make awesome embers that travel for long distances. And so that's another consideration. During the Black Saturday fires down in Australia, I was at, they actually documented where an ember traveled, this piece of bark floated 18 miles ahead of the main fire front. So don't let your eucalyptus tree catch my house on fire in Los Osos. It's
the Cal Poly pictures reminded me that after Paradise, PG&E started talking about making a major effort of putting their lines underground. What's the chance that's going to happen in Cambria?
Cambria specifically, I can't say. I will let you know that it is crazy expensive to underground, especially to kind of retrofit. So I'm actually working with the 3 major utilities right now on some projects, and they cause a lot of fires, but frankly they're the victims a lot of times, these fires coming through, and they want to underground some of their areas, and they're actually running up against sort of environmental regulations trying to get through CEQA. And so working with them is like trying to get this broad scale exemptions for some of the work that's done. So it's tough, and I don't know, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. And so I'm actually working with the evil utilities to help them with their issues. But I know that it's crazy expensive. I actually looked at my place in Los Osos, like, hey, let's get the neighbors there, because it's like we got this great view that's impeded by these terrible, just god-awful looking lines. And when I take photos, I want to Photoshop out of them, you know, sort of thing. But it's crazy expensive, and I don't know what it would be here in Cambria. It's so much cheaper, I know, to put it in the first time and do it the permit from the Coastal Commission to get it. It's sort of the same thing. Yeah, it's interesting because I noticed in this community, a lot like Los Osos, we so much love our environmental things that are through, but we so fight about it so much, and we get in each other's way. And in my opinion, as an ecologist, been doing this for 21 years, you know, it's sometimes by trying to protect every tree, we kill the forest. And that's been it's been a concern of mine here, and I've seen it in Los Osos. It's like, well, we're trying to protect every snail, you know. It's like, okay, well, there needs to be, in my opinion, areas like, well, in the name of public safety, because we're part of the ecosystem, you know, let's try to not destroy by any, but let's be real strong, you know, working that. And John G's back in here, and that is his day job. The stalking levels, so that's basically how many trees are per acre. From my experience in other places of the world, it's way more trees than would be normally expected. And as you can see it, that they're gasping for water. It's like, help me, you know, and they're competing with everything else that's out there. And then we're starting to see, honestly, with climate change, we're seeing things drying out. And it's fascinating with the fog drip. We see that go over to Fiscalini Ranch, they're doing okay over there because they've got a lot more moisture. The farther you go to the east, it dries out very quickly. And you know, it's certain portions of this town back 2015, there's like 80% mortality that's going on. So you've got already dead, weakened trees, more trees than the environment can handle at this, and they're setting itself up. And when they die, they're just more fuel on the ground to burn something, which is.
Up you're talking about, or from overhanging on the house?
Well, overhanging over the house is kind of a not a good thing,
right,
anytime. But I'm just saying from the ground up, you know, that's generally, yeah. So on your property, 10 feet up, if it's overhanging the house, it's like, ooh, let's take a look at those branches, you know, that might be overhanging. But I get it where you're saying was like, well, now you've changed up the weight distribution. That would be a question for a certified arborist, in my opinion. I'm going to get out of that one. So. All right, Chris, thank you so much. Sure. All right, my pleasure.
That was great. I appreciate Chris taking his time to be here today. His wife's been sitting patiently in the back, and they have to head off to another event. So unfortunately, he can't stay very long afterwards. But if you want to corner in the back for a couple of minutes, you might be able to get him. Our next speakers are Fire Chief William Hollingsworth from the Cambria CSD Fire Department and Tom Gray, Cambria Community Services Director. They're going to give you a very brief update on evacuation planning, what's happening in Cambria, both with the Cal Poly Dr. Nuorso study that's been going on, a new program some of you may have heard called Zone Haven, and then also a grant that Cambria has applied for, which would be an early warning system to notify Cambrians that there's an impending emergency of any type, but we're focused on wildfire or any other community emergency. So with that, I don't know, Tom or Chief, whoever wants to start first.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction. You've explained the part part of many of us in Cambria who are trying to figure out better ways to plan evacuation and routes and improvement of roads and so forth. So Professor Nawarsu himself has done a couple other studies to cover the rest of Cambria, essentially, with traffic studies to find out what would happen with in an evacuation situation like that. Oh, can I? How about now? Oh, thank you, yeah. You didn't miss too much. I'm just getting to the present. So he did his third study just this last few months. He's completed it, and it is a study which incorporates the earlier work, bringing us up to a point where we have kind of a picture of what it would take to evacuate all of Cambria, and what would be the effect of some of the proposals that have been made to improve evacuation with new routes or improvements on Highway 1. There are two things that we were pursuing, and this is the Fire Safe Focus Group. This is David Pearson, Chief Hollingsworth, Karen Dean, my colleague on the CCSD Ad Hoc Committee on Fire Evacuation, and many others. We've been pursuing two alternatives. One of them is to work out a system for adding a lane on Highway 1, a southbound lane, so that, and this is on an ad hoc basis with cones, and since we have cones, I think about 500 of them now that have been acquired through a grant, the CHP will go out and put cones down from Ardath to Highway 46, creating double lane southbound and still leaving room for a lane coming up, northbound for the emergency equipment. That's one proposal that's been somewhat developed into a protocol that could be actually executed. Another is much more of a speculative thing, and it's just a concept at this point, but it's to open up a second evacuation route going south. The results are interesting, and then we're going to have a full report, which is rather extensive and very technical, is going to be coming out quite soon, a final report. But I wanted to share with you a little bit of the basic results, the basic message. One is that if you have a split of the western part of Cambria, basically Lodge Hill and Marine Terrace, on the west side of Highway 1, if you split it between one half of it essentially using this, what they call the beach road, this conceptual beach road going down towards the south and meeting Highway 1, and the others going on Highway 1, basically if you take a line from basically halfway up in Lower Lodge Hill, the people near the Highway 1 would go on the highway, and the people down below would go down this beach road. You get a significant improvement in elapsed time, basically about half or less in the amount of time it would take to evacuate. So it is something that we have to kind of keep thinking about, even though it's only speculative. The other impact that we were looking at was the additional lane on Highway 1. And there, the verdict is kind of mixed, because it does help for that one stretch of Highway 1. It basically makes it about half the time to get the cars through, because you have two lanes rather than one. The big problem is that getting to that point, getting to Ardath and Highway 1 is still the biggest challenge, and especially for people who live on Lower Lodge Hill and Marine Terrace to get all the way up to Highway 1, but also for people who live up, if you got everybody onto Highway 1 in this one lane, southbound, until you get to Ardath, that's also a big traffic jam. And also we're also not evacuating onto a road that has no cars on it. There's already traffic on Highway 1, it's assumed. So one of the
studies in regards to evacuation times, what our infrastructure in the community is capable of handling, and what we have learned throughout this process is that there's too many people living in too small of an area with too little evacuation and egress routes. And so that actually is true of a lot of communities around here, and now we're in the position of trying to face how do we reactively handle this issue in a proactive fashion. Does that make sense? We have found over the last 100+ years of Cambria existing that we've built ourselves into this position, and now we're trying to do exactly what Chris Dyka showed us earlier, is pre-plan the problem that we hope doesn't exist. So there's two things we really worry about on the fire side. When we're talking about a wildfire occurring in this community, the two big scenarios are one that is happening in a planned event, like the chimney fire that happened a number of years ago that was over the hill. We were watching its progression. We were measuring how fast the fire was moving. And we know that at some probable time in the future it's going to hit Cambria. So we have advanced warning of that occurring, right? The other one is where suddenly something happens in the middle of the community because of a line down, a structure fire that's gone into the vegetation, or some other cause that is now affecting everybody immediately because of how it happened at the wrong time, wrong place, wrong weather, wrong time of year, and now the fire is just blowing up. Well, in the advanced planning stage, we can look at that. And when the chimney fire occurred, I went out with the battalion chiefs of CAL FIRE, and we were measuring distances and evaluating all the various components of that fire, and we defined trigger points hours in advance of when that we expected that fire to hit Cambria. And why this information that we have from Dr. Noroso at Cal Poly is so critical is that if I know the fire, I know it's going to take 4.5 hours to evacuate West Lodge Hill, well, my trigger safe in that emergency time frame is ideal. So we're going to be hoping to build or enhance certain areas in the community that we could call safe refuge areas. And by doing that, we could say, okay, everybody on this side of the community, you need to go here. Everybody on this side of the community, you need to go there. And that's not a long-term solution. That's you being there, so no matter what happens with the fire, you're safe. And as soon as it's past that point, now I could safely evacuate you and get you out of the community. So there's a couple of different ways we're trying to approach this, and that those studies and that information from the Cal Poly is critically important. One of the other things we're doing in the community, and our County Fire Chiefs Association submitted a grant through the Fire Safe Council in San Luis Obispo, and we were awarded the grant, is for a implementation of a company called Zone Haven. Is anybody familiar with what Zone Haven is? Zone Haven is an online, there's one person in this room, is an online, okay. Zone Haven is an online fire evacuation mapping program that is designed to assist the community in everything from pre-planning to training to drills to fake evacuations, all the way up to the emergency side of alerting the community and getting them out and giving them information when it's appropriate. Now, they don't do the alerting. That's done through our 911 system. But what happens is it's a computer interface. It divides the town in specific zones. That's why it's what it's called. And we can now activate zones specifically based on the incident need. Locally, Atascadero City is the only one who's actually implemented this. They started this 1.5 years ago. It's a fantastic application. And right now, because everybody does things a little bit different, the zones or areas how Cambria Fire would block off Cambria to notify and market and give people the information what to do in case of an emergency. And there's really two different groups we're trying to address with this. First, all the visitors to the community don't necessarily know the layout. They don't know what to do for an emergency specific to Cambria. We've developed the flyer. There's copies of these out in the back out there. These are designed. We're going to be working with the realtors and the chamber to get these out to all the hotels, motels, VRBOs, Airbnbs. When you stay in a hotel and you see something on the back of the door that has a picture that says you are in this room and this is how you get out, this is the same concept. It talks about everything from what to do in case of a medical emergency, of a fire, evacuation, gives you a lot of good information, but it would go with that. In that room, it has phone numbers on there as an emergency for everybody that's visiting our community. Good idea, right? We want them to be informed. Well, we're going to take that to an extra level for the people that live here because we love them. That's what we want to do. We have a 4-paneled document here that we're putting together. It is missing one piece of information, and it's the information on Zone Haven because that hasn't been finalized yet. Zone Haven will probably be in full effect by this fall, and we're still working on a lot of that. But this goes into every kind of emergency you can imagine, including active shooter and hazardous stuff with storms going down and everything else. It has a checklist on here. It tells you what to put in a go bag. It has an active checklist for you to define and put together. This is in a 4-panel brochure that conveniently folds up for your storage, and is going to be available for all the people that live here. So we're hoping to either put that out in a mailer within your water mailer down the road, or in a special mailing from the CCSD, but we want to make sure everybody has that on file, puts it on their refrigerator, and just has it available, because it's something that's critically important to make you guys successful and safe, right? Take to mitigate those problems. And because we have that in place, we now can apply for those grants when they come available. It was determined when the last one came available to apply for something we've been working on in the background for quite some time, and that's an emergency alert system for the community. One of the big things we've noticed here is that we have a hard time, because of our location, sometimes in our terrain, of getting information out to everybody. A lot of that is the limitations of cell service, right? Not everybody's cell works everywhere in the community. But we also don't have a way to just hit everything at the same time. So with this application, what we are working on is to put in a radio tower that is specific to a frequency that we're going to get set up with FCC. We're going to be able to push out information on a defined radio channel to the community to let them know what's going on. You've all traveled before. You've seen something on the side of the road. It has a sign that says, for emergencies, tuned to 6:10 a.m. We also got a whole bunch of those signs. I believe we have 11 of them between here and San Simeon that are going to be going throughout the community. They will have addressable information that we could have on loops through our computer system. So we can put on a regular update, non-emergency, just regular update, everything from the daily weather to what the tide's going to be, sunset, sundown, all that kind of stuff. We can also put in canned information. So let's say that we got a notice that there was a shark attack in Pismo, which does happen occasionally. We can now put up our shark attack notice for the people that might be going onto the beach. Tune to this. It'll say, just FYI, we noticed that there's a shark attack here. Please be careful when you're on the beach. We can let them know when we're doing prescribed burns. So when CAL FIRE, Fire Safe Council, Cambria Fire are out there taking care of pile burning and doing that pre-work that Professor Dykes was talking about, and making the understory of the fire, the forest safe, we could put that information out. Information this Saturday and Sunday. We're going to be doing some prescribed burns. If you have questions, please call the fire. It's sent has better distance, and we can capture San Simeon as well. So it's been defined that that's the best medium to use.
Two other quick questions with respect to cutting the path, if you will, for marine terrorists to being able to go to private property. Where would funds come from that? For that?
Excellent question. That would either have to come from some kind of grant application, monies dedicated through donation. It would have to be something the CCSD would have to commit long-term funds, and that would be, this is the guy to talk to at that point, possibly county grants. There was a group of people from the state secondary to legislation that was passed last year that came through and did an evaluation of Cambria, because we're one of the few places in the county that has one way in and one way out. And so from a safety standpoint, they were doing that evaluation. There's no teeth involved in that legislation, and there's no funding source for it. But we have a report that says what we already know.
Thank you. You guys do a great job.
Just on the funding issue, on the funding, is on? Yeah, is on? On the funding issue.
Just push the button in the center, Tom, and it'll come on. Should it be a green light?
There we go.
Yeah, on the funding issue, yeah, the chief is right that there are a lot of possible ways of funding a project like this. It's complicated because it's one of those things that's not necessarily funded by any particular agency. CAL FIRE doesn't actually do roads, for instance, and say CCSD doesn't do roads. But I'll tell you, the atmosphere, the atmosphere in the state, the priorities of the state are very, very much. Have very much, steered their way toward wildfire safety in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, I think the Paradise Fire, then the fires in Santa Rosa, Northern California, and all those have really changed the way the state looks at their budget for wildfire, because there's a lot of funding for things that are.
We need at the time. Another question over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, since we're a coastal community, if it's been looked at as another form of evacuation is by the ocean. I know when Santa Barbara had that big fire, they shuttled people off the ocean out of the area to evacuate them, and then eventually taxied people who were still, it went so long to give them the ability to continue working outside of Santa Barbara. Has that ever been looked at as far as getting people out?
We haven't actually looked at that as a viable option right now, and the sole reason behind that is the only place to load anybody safely anywhere near our area is San Simeon, off of that pier, and that pier has been deemed a little bit questionable. So we still have boats come in there. There are still boats, party boats that come in and fish and stuff like that. And we would have to do like the World War II cross the channel evacuation of Dunkirk and get every boat from San Luis and Morro Bay up here to San Simeon to do that. But it's not a bad idea. It's absolutely something that we can consider if for some reason the southern evacuation is taken away from us and now we have to go north. But remember, there's two different things we're looking at. Permanent evacuation until the event is passed, and temporary evacuation to a safe refuge area. And that's probably the priority, because we just want you safe. Let us deal with the problem, get you safe. That means you might have to sit there for 10 hours or so, but we'll take care of you. And then as soon as we can get you out of here, we will. But it's a good option to consider.
Just to add on about safe refuge areas, one of the things that we're also looking at, again about the Norris Rancho Marino Preserve, is if we don't do a road through there, they have a considerable amount of land. It's kind of a flat marine terrace, and it's actually pretty suitable for a possible very temporary safe refuge for a certain number of people, because it's grazed by cattle every year, and the grass is nice and short. And as the chief would tell you about grass, is if you're
probably in excess of 4,000. And that's why it's the predominant large area, the area we had tested first, because we know that's the biggest, most significant impact to the roadway infrastructure, assuming everybody was.
Well, one thing about the Dr. Novorsa's studies we should add is that he takes a scenario, he uses a scenario which I guess can be called worst case in terms of traffic, because he's assuming every residence is occupied, either by full-timers or part-timers, and all of the lodgings are occupied. And an average of 2 cars leave from each residence. And that's a very, very high level, is maybe like the ultimate Labor Day weekend or something like that. So it's not usually seen. But with his scenarios, he did, in terms of car trips, or the equivalent of car trips if you had trucks and RVs, that area of Lodge Hill on west of the highway and Marine Terrace combined is more than half of all the car trips that would happen in an evacuation. And that includes car trips from all the tourists at the lodging. So it's a lot. It's the largest chunk of Cambria, and it's the most critical one, too, in terms of evacuation because of the problem of being far from Highway 1.
Well, thank you both very much. They'll be in the back to answer questions. We're going to move on to our next speaker now. So thanks, Chief, and thanks, Tom, for that. Appreciate that. There's this speaker that'll be talking about, the trauma that can be incurred and seen as you try to prepare for or deal with it. After this, we're going to have an update on all of the North Coast area vegetation management projects that CAL FIRE, Cambria Fire, and all the other agencies have been doing to reduce the threat in our community, what's on the table, what's being done, and what's planned. And then after that, we'll stop, and then all the people outside that are showing their wares or handing out brochures will be here. Senior faculty member with the Mindfulness Academy for Addiction and Trauma Training. In addition to her clinical and academic work, Mari is a national speaker and author of several books, including Healing from Betrayal, The Creative Clinician, Facing Heartbreak, Steps to Recovery for Partners of Sex Addicts, and is co-author with her partner John of their recent children's book that I just talked about, Fiske and His Forest Friends Wildfire Safety Tips for Central Coast Kids. Mari is here to share her tips and wisdom on supporting good mental health when preparing for a potential wildfire emergency. Welcome, Mari.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's great to be here. I'm not really a public speaker, so I'll do my best. Like most therapists, we reside in the clinical space, but I'm really happy to be here, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share about an important topic around mental health and preparation for wildfire safety. So, and again, thank you, John, for this really nice job that you did with Fiske here. Okay, great. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the focus of this presentation is going to be on how we can support one another, how we can support the community, and some really important tips. We're going to start off by talking about our wonderful safety professionals, our firefighters and their families. We're going to touch on that, and then we're going to move on to other important populations in the community. I'm not used to having my laptop kind of across the room, so please bear with me. Okay, so we want to look at some of these statistics, and I think maybe I will use that microphone so I can see them here. Thank you so much. Test, test. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. So some of this recent data is pretty alarming. You may have heard they killed 85 people and burned over 153,000 acres in November of 2018. And then in 2020, more than 9,000 wildfires. 9,000 have burned over 4 million acres. That's more than 4% of the state's land, causing, of course, displacement, poor air quality. I'm sure we all experience that. And in some regions, orange-tinted skies. Really dangerous. These are just some stats, a table that I included where we can see the name of the fire, the location, the date that it started, the acres burned, structures destroyed, and then the fatalities. It's a very sobering table, I think, to look at. And though we live in Cambria and, have escaped so far and feel, safe, these are, important statistics to keep in mind, as we know. So let's talk about the impact on the mental health of our firefighters and PTSD. Firefighting was named 2017's most stressful job in the U.S. following the enlisted military personnel. Again, that to me was a sobering statistic to consider. Firefighters deal with intense physical stress, as we know, extremely high temperatures, harmful effects due to the inhalation of toxic gases. The number of fire-ground injuries has also increased. I've seen this more and more in my practice. While I don't work just solely with our firefighters and families, my practice is pretty diverse. I work with trauma and addiction and other areas. I do work over almost 2 decades now with a lot of our first responders. And that's what I see over and over again, the men and women coming in with these ground injuries. So those are slips, trips, falls, also injuries because of the use of special heavy tools and rescues, the transportation of victims and other apparatus that they wear, and then, of course, the hazardous working conditions that contribute to injuries and endanger their lives. I've lost. So interesting to see. I didn't include all. It was a massive amount of stats, but it was almost 2,000 partners and spouses and family members were tabulated, and over 60% reported that they've been impacted by an incident at work that resulted in mental health challenges. These are the spouses. And nearly 60% of respondents feel that they are secondary to the commitments of their partner's job, while over 40% feel that they're left to operate without a partner for 7+ months a year. And so in that little flame box there, we see that the most difficult part, we always come second, and the fire safety fighting always comes first. And those were many, many responses of those 2,000 respondents. Let's see here. What's going on? Yes. And this one stuck out the most to me. If a fire doesn't kill my firefighter husband, then stress surely will. And as a mental health professional, one of the things that I speak and I teach on a lot is really lowering the stigma around mental health, especially with our first responders, and especially first responders of a certain age, where reaching out for support, seeing a therapist, going through what we call EMDR, which is trauma reduction, thank goodness that that stigma is being reduced more and more, that people like myself are being invited by the good people of this community, Chief Hollingsworth and Dan and Bob and others to speak today. It really gives me a lot of happiness and joy to be here. Because there isn't a lot of focus on mental health for our first responders. And a lot of times when I'm working with first responders, they're very fearful. They feel as if, like, well, is this going to, categorize me as crazy, or is this going to impact my job or my insurance, or even, being able to go up the ranks? And so it's so vitally important that our first responders get the help that they need, and not only our first responders, but what are perfectly sober and had a really healthy relationship with substances now may have an addiction towards substances, even over-the-counter substances. Anxiety and panic attacks are off the charts with survivors. Sometimes depression, especially if there's been a physical injury where they can't work anymore or be providing income. I also see a lot of anger with these survivors, oftentimes at the community, sometimes at emergency agencies, sometimes where they feel like there wasn't enough information about, like what all of you are learning today, about the escape routes, about what we're going to do. There was a really good question here from somebody about beach access, right? And that is a really important question, because those were some of the resentments that come in that we therapists who do this specialized type of work hear about. Sometimes the higher power, sometimes there's anger at self for not being more prepared, a lot of self-shaming or a lot of shaming and blaming on the significant other. If their significant other sort of poo-pooed the idea that, oh, it's going to be fine, don't worry about it. Financial stress off the charts, and then medical challenges if injured. Also, we look at these physical symptoms. People are developing IBS, heart symptoms. I'm hearing now, what's really interesting is this uptick in clients who have never been impacted by a wildfire, don't know anybody who has, but now, suddenly, they're starting to come into my practice saying, I live in this area, Temecula, or, San Bernardino, or Central Coast, or wherever it is, and I'm starting to have this vicarious trauma as I think about what might happen to my house or my family, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with that. So we're starting to see an uptick of people who have never been impacted by Oliver or Jeremiah or Stanley. We'd be very sad about that. Okay. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about this now, move over to this population of people, the impact on mental health for vulnerable individuals in our community. This is another big concern, especially for people who live out of state or in different parts of the state where they're not impacted by wildfires, but they have a loved one who might live in a place like, Paradise or, Cambria for that matter, and they're concerned about their well-being. So elderly or shut-ins, we have an older community here in Cambria. I'll be 60 this summer, so I feel like I'm, fitting in. And there's a lack of support at times for our elderly community. Sometimes there's transportation issues. I hear a lot also from elderly clients or just people that I volunteer with. Oftentimes that they live alone and they're a widower or a widow, they're really worried about being preyed upon. There's a big scare, what if somebody takes advantage of me? My neighbors have all passed away, or there's all these new, I feel like I'm getting left behind, I can't walk very well, or I'm wheelchair bound. What about me? And if I tell somebody, what if they come and hurt me or break into my home? And we might think, well, this is a safe community. That's sort of silly. But these are real fears for these individuals, and as such, they won't share that they have these transportation or mobility issues. And that's really something that we're going to talk about in just a minute here, how we can help them. Also, so we talked about mobility challenged people, and then people with intellectual differences, right? We have this lovely lady here, and, there's this uncertainty at times. I have volunteered with adults with Down syndrome, and they're, a wonderful group of people. but also very trusting. And there's sometimes a lack of scary people, right? But really, they are very frightened. And so they don't know what's going on. They wonder if somebody is trying to take advantage of them. There's sometimes a high level of paranoia with people who suffer with this. But just like, you know, anything else, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, whatever that is, this is a mental health issue, something that affects the brain. And so we want to, again, you know, really reduce that stigma. People who have limited transportation or resources, again, of course, are going to be worried about escaping a wildfire, concerns about survival post-wildfire. Where will I go? Will it be handicap friendly? You know, can I get my chair in there? How will I shower? And also there's a big fear of not wanting to be a burden on their neighbors and feeling like I just don't want to think about it. We would think, right, people who are wheelchair bound would actually be those individuals who are preparing the most. But at times, again, we're seeing that dorsal vagal response where it's like, I don't want to think about it. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. So these are individuals in our community that really need our support and encouragement. And then our homeless population. And I know here in California there's all kinds of back and forth about the homeless population. Many, many moons ago, I worked for corporate America, and I was a marketing executive, and I worked for Rescue Missions, so a large organization that did all the fundraising for all the rescue missions in the United States, including the Red Cross and other Special Olympics and other organizations like this. And my specific responsibility was to work directly with the homeless. So I'd work with the executive directors at these facilities, and then I would do what's called gathering resource. I would get to know these individuals going through the program, trying to transition off the streets. So these might be veterans, these might be people who were homeless due to mental illness, addiction. I lived in, you know, saved up my money and any little side job I could get, you know, fast food, restaurant, you name it, and moved over to Maui with my boyfriend at the time, and, you know, couch surfed over there. So, you know, I know what that's like to feel like you don't really have a place to land. So I have a real heart for these individuals. And imagine, you know, we need to also have, you know, education for them. And yes, consequences if they have fires that are being started that are not legal. There needs to be consequences for sure, but also education and other means of support. So I wanted to touch on just a few of those populations who are also vulnerable so that we can, you know, end that stigma and try and come together as a community. One of the things, so let's talk about some solutions, because what I've learned from the folks who are much more knowledgeable in this area than I am, including Bob and of course Chief Hollingsworth and Dan Turner and others, is that Cambria's #1 challenge for our housebound community is knowing who in our community is actually housebound. We just don't have a robust list of these individuals. And so that's a big problem. So when our housebound community members have better survival success, when they have access to these resources, when somebody, a volunteer, can prepare, I have resource slides at the end here, I'm happy to share. And they can also register for Smart 911, which is really cool. I didn't even know about this until this presentation. I don't know why this is off my radar, but I'm so happy to know about this resource. So Smart 911 allows the public to create a you did as well. Oh my gosh, it's so scary. And did you lose somebody?
I didn't lose anybody.
Okay.
I couldn't sleep well for at least a year.
Exactly.
Waking up at 4:31 in the morning to what sounded like a train coming through my apartment.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Yes. I did as well. Okay. Yeah, well, I'm sorry that you went through that as well. It was really, really scary. John did as well. And it's, I've never lived through a wildfire disaster, but I have lost somebody in a wildfire. Heartbreaking, you know, and then working with the clientele that I work with, and then surviving that earthquake was scary, and I did lose somebody to that. So it does bring up those feelings, and it was so, I remember, where was I? It was like somewhere, kind of like a structure like this. I'm trying to remember what it was. But there were a lot of people walking around, and I could feel the ground kind of moving a little bit. And for, yeah, at least a year, you know, I would stop and have that trauma response. So it's a very real thing. But even if you've never survived an earthquake or a natural disaster, all of us are subject to vicarious trauma because of what we see in the news. I don't know if any of you have watched the documentary on the Paradise wildfire. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It is powerful. It'll have you on the edge of your seat. It's like 90 minutes. It's an excellent, excellent. I think it's on Netflix. Yeah, it's a streaming. Or they may even have that for free on YouTube now. But it's a really important. It's an important portrait of what happened. That's for sure. And it's tough. But anyway, social media, anything at all. We're all subject to this vicarious trauma. So I want to recognize those who have never survived, who haven't been a survivor. Okay, so let's just touch on some ways that trauma can manifest. So here we have our ostrich friend, and I think we all know the saying, right? Head in the ground, be that sympathetic nervous system response, right? That fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So I will be fine. People are overreacting. Cambria is fine. I've lived here my entire life. Nothing's going to happen. Or sometimes that, what I call the spiritual bypassing. God's going to take care of me. I'm covered. I don't need to prepare. If I'm meant to die in a wildfire, so be it, right? So again, that is more of a sympathetic kind of like, don't tell me what to do. I don't care about that stuff. You people are overreacting, right? Again, a trauma response. And then emotional attachment can sometimes occur as a coping mechanism when people are faced with stressful or difficult situations, and that would include our fire safety personnel, right? Trying to get all of this information together, the grants, all of it is extremely, stressful and intense. And then emotional detachment can also look and feel like indifference, defensiveness, right? Don't tell me I need to trim my bushes, fear or numbness even. Okay, and then we have the opposite end of what we call the polyvagal ladder, and we'll take a minute, next slide to look at that. And I call that the Chicken Little syndrome, right? The sky is falling. So this is the hypervigilance and over-preparation, and it can manifest in these ways, right? It's this elevated state of constantly assessing potential threats around you. That's something that I did after surviving that earthquake. It was a lot of, do I have my earthquake packs? Do I have this? Do I have that? Do I need to retrofit my house? What is that looking like? So there was a lot of that went on. And John would probably say that I still am a little bit wired that way. Where's our go bags? And do we have where's our fire extinguisher and whatnot? So I like to be prepared and knowledgeable about that kind of thing. People who have survived war, survived abuse, natural disasters that we're talking about, or have PTSD, can exhibit that type of hypervigilance. So it's not unusual when I'm working with fire, and that can be very difficult in families as well. And then going into debt to prepare, I've had clients who have shared that, and we may know people who have just put all this stuff on their credit card or wanting to build that. Do you guys remember that old movie Tremors? Do you remember that? Tremors, anyway, it's kind of I'm dating myself, but it's a funny old movie. And it's basically about these preppers, people living out in the desert and prepping, and it was kind of funny. Anyway, so, and then alienating friends, families, and neighbors and not respecting their boundaries. I have a neighbor who has a tree that makes me uncomfortable. It's not my business, so they'll trim that. I live on a meadow, and when we moved here, I got to know Chief Hollingsworth by sending him, Chief Hollingsworth, what's going on with this meadow? There's waist-high dry grass. I'm worried, and I was worried, right, because our backyard is right next to the meadow, and he gave good information, was very supportive in that respect. And sometimes this can look like lecturing or arguing or isolating, and again, those fears of anxiety, anger, and frustration. Okay. All right, so this is what we call this a polyvagal ladder, but essentially really what that is just a little example of the nervous system, our nervous system as a ladder, right? And I have to attribute this to Deb Dana, who's also a therapist, and I thought this was a really great way of looking at this. So healing and moving forward really starts with understanding ourselves, what's going on in our brain and our nervous system, why we're feeling what we're feeling, why we may put off tasks, why we may not even, be inclined to, attend meetings like this, right? So down here at the very bottom, we have that little person and dorsal vagal activation. And so when we think about this, the nervous system, the anterior nervous system, there's, right, our sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this dorsal vagal activation is this numb, collapsed, and shut down. You know, I'm buried under a huge load. I can't get out. I feel a lot of sympathy for us being in this room. Let's get out of here. And so you and your friend get out of that room, stand. That's good. Boy, I felt a lot of sympathy for being in that sympathetic nervous system, the fight, the flight, right? Now you're back in your calm space, right, that interior nervous system. Then you're going to look over here to the parasympathetic and step into that room. And that's our rest and digest room. That's where things are calm. Maybe there's an ocean view. Maybe there's, you know, a comfortable, you know, sofa or chair, cute little animal, whatever that is. That's what we're trying to help people move into, that balanced, peaceful, social, engaged ventral vagal activation. But oftentimes, as we move up that polyvagal ladder, it's not unusual to find ourselves in that activated state. So in ventral vagal, there's a feeling of I'm at ease, I can manage whatever comes my way, I feel empowered and connected, I see the big picture, and connect to the world and people in it. So hopefully today, with the information that all of us are learning, we're feeling a little bit more on that ventral vagal space. And then again, I think this is so cute with what Deb did with the little avocados, or California avocados. So how do we get there, right? So if we're in this dorsal vagal, kind of this immobilized, collapsed parasympathetic state, you can do these things on the right? You can phone a safe contact, you can work with a therapist or coach, medical facility, ask for help, you know, ask for help from a family member, somebody you feel really safe and connected to. And then as you move up, if you find yourself in that sympathetic fight or flight, that frustration, the activation, the irritation, the putting off, maybe the defensiveness, that's when you would want to say, okay, you know what? I need to, again, connect with somebody, and I need to identify and verbalize to someone else, right? We are co-regulating, right? That's what we're designed to do. And let that person know that I am really agitated. Simple things that we can all do for ourselves is notice where our attention is, right? Are we multitasking? There was a big push for multitasking, remember in the 90s and the early 2000s? We now have enough brain science that says if you are trying to do a lot of things at the same time, this is really not good for you. It's not good for you on a mortality level, on a health level. I won't go into the science behind it, but it's very interesting to a brain nerd like me around what are called telomeres at the end of your DNA strands. We want nice, long, robust, healthy, long telomeres. We do not want these little short, degraded telomeres. Multitasking degrades those telomeres. When that happens, we feel dis-ease, and that invites disease. That's a whole nother talk, but it's very, very important to start thinking about presence and focus wherever you are. And that can be as simple as, you know, oh, I'm brushing my teeth right now, and I'm noticing that I'm worried about this presentation this morning. Oh, and what about the grass? It's getting really long in that meadow again. Oh, and then where did I put my sandals for today? Right, that kind of thing. You know, I'm here, and I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm feeling that mint taste, and I'm feeling the cool water rinsing in my mouth, and I like the way my teeth feel right now in my head. I can breathe and just be present in this moment, right? So as I was sitting back with my guy, and then Bob was introducing me, I thought, well, let me move up to that chair in front. Let me mindfully move my body because I'm feeling a little anxious right now. So let me just move and sit down and notice where I am in my body, right? Instead of thinking, oh no, my laptop's not up there. I'm going to have my back to somebody. It's just staying really present and practicing that. It's just a practice. So because our attention may be engaged and absorbed in worries or what ifs, and we have very little left to focus on the task at hand for wildfire safety preparation, and that is really true. The more we worry about something, the more we will put that task off. This is human behavior. And using that as a tool, we develop the ability to be present for really any given experience, just as it is, right? That's it. That's it. And so as I noticed people were kind of getting up and leaving, you know, as I came up to present, I felt a feeling of like, oh, you know, and then I thought, I don't care. If there's one person, that's the one person that I'm supposed to be, you know, sharing this information today. So that's okay. I'll just do my thing here, right? And then as we just practice that and practice that breathing, noticing the sights, the sounds around us, being connected with others, eventually we learn how to bring that mindfulness awareness to every area of our life, right? And in turn, we improve our level of motivation to fully engage in activities, even if those activities bring us a little anxiety, like wildfire preparedness. Like other skills, mindfulness can be cultivated and honed. The more mindful you are, the more you benefit from that. And it has no religion, no attachment to any religion or spiritual message or affiliation. It can be a practice by anybody, no matter what their beliefs are. There's some research on mindfulness, and I want to be sensitive about our time here. So if you'd like, you can take a picture of the screenshot, but I'll just go through the titles. Stress and reduction of trauma, big, big, big. We have so much research that's fascinating over the last 10 years. It really is so, so interesting. If you've not thought about mindfulness before or haven't practiced mindfulness in a while, I really encourage you to give a shot, right? In health, we have groundbreaking information. One study that was so interesting of biotech workers who are a stressed out group, let me tell you, that revealed that mindfulness makes people happier. We have researchers at the University of Wisconsin that worked really hard. And what I thought was fascinating about this study, this is a bit that I pulled out, there were lots of good bits, is that it boosted their immune system as measured by the amount of flu antibodies in their blood after receiving a flu shot. That is very interesting, right? So similarly, our focus and concentration, so by its very nature, mindfulness will help with that, and our cognitive abilities, right? And then our happiness. So Richie Davidson is a psychologist who is very well known and respected in our clinical field. And he did an 8-week mindfulness study with participants, both at rest, and it was fascinating, what came out of that study. So if you've been thinking about mindfulness or you're curious about it, this is a free and easy way to feel better. And then finally, community hope and support through planning and preparing. So fire disaster planning, we know, can be a really stressful experience for communities. It's no joke. And in order to alleviate links between disaster planning and negative outcomes, engaging in communal support is helpful in these 3 ways. And we see this over and over and over again in fire safety communities and in communities who have gone through disasters, like Malibu recently. And so one is mutuality. It's a reciprocal pattern of recognizing a shared problem and compassionately supporting others in the community. That's what we're all doing here today, so we can check that box off, right? Number 2 is really neat. It's a co-construction of a community narrative, right? Or participants relaying the story of the town's unity and bootstrap mentality. So when John and I, we've been visiting Cambria for 35 years, several times a year, and just fell in love with, like so many people, with this part of the world. We're both native Californians, and we thought, one of these days it'd be cool to have a house. And we had that opportunity a couple of years ago to buy a home here. So right away on our long drive up from LA, to Cambria, we wanted to get to know, how did we get the name Cambria, and how did it start, and who were the first, people here who discovered it? Or is it, who are the first, residents and, Native Americans and all of that. We were really curious about it and learned about it. And Cambria, I would say, most definitely has a resilient spirit, right? It definitely has that pioneer, old backpack. I can stick it in there and, other little things, and then drop that off, and it can help somebody. So we want to think about that. Teamwork helps us not only to prepare, but to come together. And there's no shame in asking others for help. You can volunteer. And then also, again, just a little shout about, really ending that stigma around mental health. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be scared or depressed or feeling a little lonely or unsure of next steps or frightened. It's okay to reach out for support. It doesn't just have to be to a therapist, but just a neighbor or somebody that you trust. And then to recap, right, so wildfire safety preparation is challenging. It can bring up many different thoughts and feelings. It's okay to feel anxious. We want to stay abreast of information. I think it's so important to be gentle with ourselves, and every little baby step is okay. Maybe getting a fire extinguisher or learning the evacuation route or just attending today. Baby steps are still steps. You can adopt a neighbor in need that might need help. You can be patient with yourself and others. Of course, we talked about go bags today. Again, with the pet supplies, that's covered also in the book that we wrote around how to take care of pets. respect each other's boundaries, and then keep your tank full emotionally in the car, and express gratitude to and for our first responders. And we really want to bring the children and teens into the prep as well, right? We don't want to forget about our young population in Cambria as well. So with that in mind, John and I wrote this book. It's a free resource. We had a lot of fun doing that together over the last few months. And John and I have been together, gosh, ages, for 30 years or something. And so this was really fun for us to do together. So we've got Fisky, you know, the fire safety fox, and then that little owl, John named him Owl Capone. And then we have Hursty, so after her, so Hursty, the thirsty fire hydrant. That's Moonstone, the sea otter. And then, you know, Nitwit, Mrs. Lodge. We have Turkey Putney, who's our wonderful leader of this event today, and who obviously is Cambria's retired fire chief and led our efforts for today. Dan Turner, who's a retired CAL FIRE SLO chief. And then I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up Craig's last name, so I won't even attempt it. But Craig and I had a really nice chat, gosh, for a couple of hours, and he's doing amazing things with the CERT team. If you want to learn more about that, you can reach out to Craig. Also, thank you to John for creating the Fisky, the fire safety fox, and Moonstone, which are the logos now, and the teacher T-shirts and all of that good stuff. And then also the high school. The high school got together, printed out all of the T-shirts, right, Bob, right, and all the banners, the posters, everything. So good on them. Well done. And then organizations and people who work hard to preserve our beautiful community, all of our teachers, therapists, faith leaders, health workers, volunteers, especially those volunteers who clean up the brush and the trash, those hardworking individuals, thank you for that. And then our local businesses who help spread the word, and our friends and community members. We really appreciate you. If you want to get involved, you can join the Fire Safety Committee. It's really fun. We meet every few weeks, and for me, it's been really helpful because I've made some friends in the community, being a new resident in the community, and it's nice to get involved and, to help out in these efforts. So it's fun, and, if you want to do some sponsorship or join the CERT program or just donate your time or talent, everybody's welcome. I'm not going to go through all of these support resources. There's some really good ones. If you would like those, please feel free to email me, and I will be very, very happy to send you any of these slides, or you can take a quick picture with your phone. I'll leave that up a little bit here for you. This, by the way, right here, this Red Guide booklet is an excellent booklet. I just learned about that. Really, really good booklet. And also that FEMA Preparing for Disaster online booklet, that's free, and that's very, very informative. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I don't either. No, I don't. I wish I could give you better answers around that. I will say that I can be a relentless advocate for causes that I believe in, and like a dripping water. And so I have met, if I met with Stone, I am a constant dripping water source, and I have a real heart for homeless. So I really appreciate that question, and it's a problem and something that we can get involved in and be that. No, I know, yeah. I join you in that frustration. I wish I had better news, yeah.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much. Don't forget your glasses. So our final speakers we're going to have up today before we end the speaking portion, and you're welcome to visit the people who are displaying outside, and I want to give a shout out again to them. That's the North County Horse Emergency Evacuation Team. Our Cambria Community Emergency Response Team has representatives out there. Fire Safe Focus Group, CAL FIRE San Luis Obispo, Cambria CSD Fire, and then also we have HEART for your pet needs out there. I don't know if SLO Animal Services made it here or not. The sheriffs, SLO County Sheriffs is here. We appreciate that for Reverse 911 and Smart 911. And then finally also we have the Cambria Community Healthcare District out there. So our final speakers is, I'm going to ask Chief Hollingsworth, who doesn't need an introduction other than for those of you online, who's the chief of the Cambria Community Services Fire Department, is going to give a brief update on the 2022 Fire Hazard Fuel Reduction Program. And then Chief Hollingsworth and John G. and probably other members of California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, what we all know now as CAL FIRE, including John G., will give an update on vegetation management projects that are either planned or in progress for the North Coast area to make our...
That gets noticed every year at this time. We set a date for when that clearance is required, and that typically is around July 15th. That is what it is this year. Some people are concerned. You've even heard some people say earlier today that they wish that could be done a little bit earlier. There's reasons why it's done now, and that's because, believe it or not, the time of year we worry about the most is mid to late fall. So that's when the perfect storm for Cambria exists, where we get the hottest weather, the nicest climate. Maybe the winds and climate turn around and push the winds in the kind of like the Santa Anas and make us concerned about that. So having it done by July 15th is the standard for Cambria. We average about 2,000 parcels that have to be cut every year, and of that, about 100 to 150 are people that choose not to comply. It's their right to choose not to do that, but then it's also our responsibility to go in after the fact and hire somebody at their expense plus fees to go clear that parcel. So that's why sometimes you'll drive around and see stuff that is not cut into late July, because people have chosen not to comply. There's another reason that happens, and it's a little bit more difficult to describe. If you own this piece of property right here and there is a home on it, that's under the jurisdiction of CAL FIRE, which John, Captain G here, can talk about in a minute. If this separate lot over here is unincorporated, I can make you clear that lot secondary to the Health and Safety Code to keep Cambria safe. If this owner also owns this property, but they are separate, under separate parcel numbers, I could still make you clear that. But if this owner decides to district and assess his property and now combine everything into one, I can no longer address that property. It now falls under the jurisdictional authority of CAL FIRE and the Public Resource Code. And sometimes that can be difficult just because of time of year and inspectors. And I know this year they're staffing way up, and their goal specifically is going to be 100% compliance. And
hopefully we can get them up here and start doing some more inspections. I can't promise anything. We have a big county, and they do have to do the entire county. The engine will probably try and go out as well and do some inspections. But it's going to be, there's a lot of structures up here in the SRA. The entire town's in the SRA, so it takes a lot of work. I know we did it probably 6 years ago or 7 years ago now, and it took 3 months to do the entire town of Cambria. And that was without fires going all the time. So just know that we're going to be trying to go out there and do the inspections, but it's going to take some time. So I'm also one of our vegetation management coordinators. So I've been working on a lot of the projects up here in Cambria. We do have one approved project up on the Cobell Ranch. It's about 650 or so acres. We got unanimous approval from the Coastal Commission to do that project. And we are currently on pause right now due to nesting bird season. So we have to wait for, we either do bird surveys or wait for the birds to leave before we can actually do more work in there. So that's why it's kind of quiet. But once we get outside of nesting bird season, expect it to start ramping up again, and you'll start hearing our chippers and the chainsaws again. We're trying to, the goal there, the Covell Ranch and Cambria in general is well overstocked with trees. So we're at about 500 trees per acre. Native Monterey pine stands are about 150 to 200 trees per acre is what the normal Monterey pine stand is without human intervention and human fire suppression. So we're trying to reduce the tree numbers down to 250 trees per acre, not quite going all the way back to the native 150 trees per acre, but we're trying to go there. That's one of our goals. We're not nuking the entire forest. We're not cutting down every single tree. We're a leave program, and they're trying to develop a similar program so that they can do the same kind of work on their properties. And potentially some more of those projects up on the north coast, north of Cambria here. State Parks has been doing a lot of work in the San Simeon State Park. I don't know if anyone's been up there to see their work, but they've been doing quite a bit of clearing the understory and thinning out of the Monterey pines to bring it back to a more native state. And they're actually doing, for those worried about the monarch butterflies, they're doing research for the endangered butterflies and trying to see exactly what the monarchs need for those trees, and see how fire actually affects those species. As far as any other projects, we've been kind of slowly working on the piles around town. We're now on pause until next year, probably next rainy season. So yeah, that's about all I've got. Mm-hmm. So her concern is about equipment use on the Covell Ranch and potentially starting a fire. So one of our components to using equipment out there is there has to be a fire. Smoke actually helps with some of these diseases in the trees to help eradicate the disease. So we need to somehow try and get some fire back in there and promote a healthier forest. It's native to this forest. It had fire in it all the time. Probably every 7 to 12 years, there's probably a lightning fire in Cambria before human activity here. So it would just creep around and burn in the understory, and then you'd have cleared patches throughout the forest of understory. So we're trying to get back to that. That's what we're looking to do. So our inmate program, the population has been decreasing. I think that's a well-known fact. We have been standing up other fire crews to take that place. So we in San Luis County have a fuels crew, which is a 12-person crew that's dedicated to wildland fuel mitigations year-round. And then we've got the 3Cs. We've got 2 crews that are funded in this county for 3Cs, and we actually have a National Guard crew as well. There's a 24-person hand crew that can do fuel reduction work, and they're planning on adding a second National Guard crew this new fiscal year in July 1st. So we do have crews. We still have a few Cuesta crews, the inmate conservation camp crews available. It's just the population has been declining, so it's been harder to keep those staffed. And then as far as the long-term fire retardant, you will have to ask Caltrans about that. Caltrans is not allowing us to spray on any highways. Hold up for that. Yes. No. That's eligible inmates are going down. Yes, prison inmates. Yeah, so that's the eligible. So our inmate crews are, yeah. Yeah. Well, we do also have some crews down in Ventura that are parolee crews. So we have some crews that they don't usually make it up to this county, but we do have some in our San Luis unit that are down in Ventura that are parolees. But as far as yes, our inmate crews are we used inmates out of CMC, and our eligible inmate population has been declining. So that's we're down crews because of that.
Within the jurisdictional boundary of the CCSD, there's parcels defined, and we know the owners of everything. So if there's something that doesn't comply, it's as simple as us going through the process. We re-adopt it every year. We just did that this last month. All the mailers went out. If they don't comply, we notice them and we force them to comply. Either they do it or we hire somebody at their expense. In regards to the state side, that pushes out a little bit different, and they do it under a different law, but we have the ability to pursue that. So that's why I say they're not necessarily going to come in and assist us. We don't have an issue every year in regards to fulfilling the guidelines for the fire hazard crew reduction program. There are theoretical plans, and we have talked about this as a strategic plan that is far down the road for the CCSD about developing a 100% defensible space ordinance for the community, which would be adopting things like Public Resource Code, Health and Safety Code, Property Management Code, encapsulating all that into one and being able to apply it to every parcel and make it a seamless thing. There's a lot of back work that needs to be done there, a lot of legal work, a lot of resources and personnel that would have to be addressed, but that's a theoretical possibility. But that's down the road.
Yeah, as far as projects coming from CAL FIRE, we have to abide by CEQA when we're doing the fuel reduction projects. So we have to do environmental analysis. Say for the Covell Ranch, we had to actually go to the Coastal Commission and get a permit through another agency to the Coastal Commission, because the Coastal Commission would not allow CAL FIRE to get a permit directly from them. We had to go through a third party to get a permit from the Coastal Commission to do the work. So that's part of our problem with getting projects here in Cambria is it's all in the coastal zone, and we have to work through another government agency to the Coastal Commission in order to get these projects to work.
Is there a sense of urgency on the bureaucratic departments, or is there not a sense of urgency?
So the Coastal Commission unanimously approved our project, but their time frames and their stuff, it's as soon as you are ready to go, it's 2 months from then before you could even get onto the Coastal Commission's approval process. So they're looking at different ways to potentially either get a new permit or remove fuel management from the coastal zone. But that's all, it has to come from the legislature. So it's a matter of changing.
To all of our speakers, thanks to all the agencies, CAL FIRE, thanks to the Sheriff's Department for coming on out. The command officers had to come on out and do the reverse 911 today and everything because they've got a little bit of a budget issue with bringing out their public education folks on a weekend. We all have budgets. So I appreciate that dedication. The healthcare district, the Cambria Fire, obviously CAL FIRE. Thank you all very much, and have a great day. We're going to do another one of these in September. That one will be focused on all risks, so it'll be on earthquake, all the other types of scenarios that we can find ourselves in. So please take some of the information today, go home and do something and engage with your neighbor. We are also offering community or neighborhood talks. There's a sign up in the back at the CERT booth where you can have myself and 2 other people come to your home, and we will talk to you about preparing for and planning for an evacuation, what you should do.